Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this RPG review I'm going to be looking at Davey Brion Jackson's cinematic Environs Aerial Reaches, published by Critical Hit Publishing. Now, this is the latest in a line of D&D 5th edition supplements from Critical Hit. I've reviewed previous entries in the series and you can see those by clicking on the thumbnails there. These books are designed to make environments more interesting and to provide GMs with a sort of toolkit they can use to make journeys and wilderness style adventuring more interesting. Now, this is one of the entries in the series that I've been most intrigued to read, since the others deal with well-known terrain types. Even if you're not a scientist or an explorer in real life, you've probably at least got a basic idea what the Arctic, a desert or a mountain is like. Whereas this supplement covers aerial shenanigans. Now, as someone who loves the idea of airships and crams them into his RPGs whenever possible, I'm very intrigued and interested to see how this goes. The book is a 44-page colour PDF, which is about twice the size of previous entries in the series, and it has the same beautiful and unobtrusive artwork that has graced the rest of the cinematic Environs books. The introduction will be very familiar to anyone who has read other entries in the series, and if not, I recommend you give those a look by clicking there. It defines the cinematic feeling of the game that the authors are trying to capture in this book, and it talks about how the rest of the book is going to be laid out, before giving a handy list of common terms, defining them so that you don't have to pause mid-flow and have your game grind to a halt whilst you flip frantically through a core book. I've been there myself. It's not a good look on anyone, so anything that minimises book flipping is a big plus as far as I'm concerned. The book moves on to address the issue of game balance where flight is involved. Now, given how many people seem to lose their minds when the Aarakocra were released as a player race, I think this is probably a wise decision on behalf of the authors. The author offers a few brief thoughts on the availability of flight and how the power level of flying mounts can be scaled for your game. Now, this section isn't massive, to be honest, and covers about half a page, so don't be expecting a massively detailed treatise on game balance. However, I quite like this approach. The author treats the readers as adults, offering some advice, but at no point wagging his authorial finger and saying, "Beware lest you under or overpower your game, foolish mortals." And I like that. I like books that treat their audience as an adult and don't attempt to handhold you through everything. A section on aerial combat, chases and contests follows. This section gives you all the rules you could need to cover those circumstances in D&D, breaking chases down into extended contests, where each side involved is attempting to accumulate a number of successes to either catch or evade their opponent. This is a great simple system and reminds me of the way chases are handled in Fate, and I'm sure in other games as well. I like that Critical Hit haven't felt the need to ladle on great dollops of additional rules and subsystems when, as this section shows, the elegantly simple core mechanic can handle it with only fairly minimal tweaking. As though the author is trying to lure me in even more with Fate-style mechanics, the subjective distance is covered by abstract areas called zones that you can move between. Effectively, the GM defines a number of areas and uses them as a very simple map, providing some often necessary guidance for both themselves and the players to keep the relative positioning of combatants clear, but without requiring the super detailed approach that more sort of tactical miniatures-based gaming seems to go for. The combat, by necessity, which is covered next, is a little more complicated than ground-based combat. After all, we're dealing with creatures potentially moving in all three dimensions. However, to their credit, the author has tried not to make it too ridiculously complicated, providing a list of manoeuvres or stunts that aerial combatants can use to achieve various effects, such as vying for position or dive-bombing an opponent. The next section begins with the evocative title Sky Pirates. So basically, Critical Hit have hooked me with the first chapter, and this is where they really start to reel me in. If you're anything like me, the idea of normal pirates is fertile ground for all sorts of roleplay potential and interesting campaign frameworks. Take those motifs and transport them from the deep cerulean of the oceans up into the swirling blue and whites of the sky, and you've got Pirates Plus, as far as I'm concerned. All the benefits of normal pirates, the fertile role-playing, the plot twists, the intense emotions of them, the high-action combat, but made more interesting by the fact it's in a slightly more foreign environment. This chapter covers pretty much the main stage you would need to stage daring attacks and boarding actions from the deck of your skyship, providing roll guidelines and an entertaining fumble crit table for when you roll either really well or really disastrously. The chapter is very easy to read and again has a lot of potential use for a campaign without really adding a lot of complexity. I'm pretty sure these rules would work fine with a more traditionally nautical campaign as well. We then move on to content that is more similar to previous entries in the series, aerial conditions. Effectively, this discusses a number of issues and factors that might complicate an aerial existence. There are also some additional, tougher falling rules that result in broken bones and characteristic loss, rather than simple hit point damage. I'm not sure whether I'd use these myself, since I tend to keep my damage fairly abstract when I run D&D, but it's nice to have it as an additional option. Aerial hazards are next on the list, offering mini encounters or scenes that you can drop into your game to represent particular hazards that may vex your sky-going heroes. There are a couple of more normal encounters such as storms and tornadoes. However, this chapter seems to contain more strange encounters than previous entries in the series. My personal favourites are aetheryte belts and aetheryte storms, effectively aetheryte being sort of floating motes of land. Think of it as a fantasy version of the asteroid belts and storms so beloved in science fiction games, but reskinned for a fantasy setting. I think these are great examples of how an influence from a non-fantasy game can inform the sort of stuff you drop into your D&D campaign. I'd never even considered fantasy asteroids before, but I wouldn't be surprised if aetheryte makes an appearance in a future D&D game of mine at some point. Each hazard spread gives you guidelines on how the characters might find themselves in that situation, what you can do to change or switch up the scene if it runs on a bit to prevent it becoming stale, and some suggestions for determining who is affected by the hazard. All of these are written in a straightforward manner that will be easy to reference quickly. Always handy if your players do something unexpected and you need a quick hit of inspiration. In the appendix of the book, a new background, Windborne Skyrider, is introduced, allowing a player to portray someone who has lived their entire lives in the aerial reaches and feels at one with the wide expanses of the sky. A new language that uses flags is also introduced as a means of communicating over long distances between aerial ships. It's very interesting and I love the fact that they're doing something a little different with the language system. There's a short list of aerial equipment and some intriguing new materials introduced, ranging from aetheryte, which we mentioned earlier, also known as floatstone, and aetherwood, harvested from a strange tree with bizarre anti-gravitational properties. A number of sky-going vehicles are also provided in this section, covering a wide gamut of different styles from pedal-powered ornithopters to dirigibles. Chances are if you're looking for an example of a fantasy airship, you'll probably find something to your taste in this section. Although oddly I couldn't find a table containing the statistics for any of the vessels listed, which seemed an odd omission. There are guidelines for piloting them, but nothing to tell you how resistant they are to damage or anything like that. Like I say, it's an odd omission given that early chapters focus on aerial combat. In conclusion, I very much enjoyed this book. Reading it got me really excited about the subject matter and had me flipping through my own D&D campaign notes, desperately trying to figure out how I can crowbar some skyships into the game. However, there were a couple of little things missing, like the ship stats I mentioned a second ago, that I found a little odd. Not game-breaking by any means. I'm pretty sure you could just use the D&D naval ship stats tweaked a little bit. Maybe that's even what the author intended, but it would have been nice to see more guidance regarding this. Aerial Reaches is $4.95 US from DriveThruRPG, and I'll put a link in the description down below. It's a bit more expensive than previous entries in the series, but like I said at the start, it is double the size. At just over £3 in British money, you really cannot grumble for that, since you're getting a very useful toolkit, a little grab box of delights, if you will, that you can reach into as a GM when your players pull a skyship out of their backsides and look at you expectantly as though you'd somehow predicted an aerial jaunt. This book is especially useful for GMs who are maybe not as confident in their improv skills, just to give them a few ideas and get them moving in the right direction. But it would still be very useful to GMs who are a little more confident, since it's bursting with ideas and inspiration. And we all need that hit of inspiration sometimes, as I said earlier. If you're planning to feature an aerial component, or perhaps even a nautical campaign, since I don't know if Critical Hit will do a nautical entry in the series, I highly suggest you give this book a go. It's well worth the money. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. You'll consider clicking on the red dice up there to subscribe to my channel. You can find me on all the normal social media, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, etc. Links down below. If you have any comments or suggestions, please put them in the comments box down below. I really enjoy reading what you write. So until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming.